I'm Scott Allen Miller. This is my everyday life. Living in Leon, Nicaragua. I've been an expat for the last 10 years and an immigrant for the last 6 months. I officially live here in Nicaragua, and today is the TikTok shutdown day. Now, I'm recording this early, so there's every possibility that someone or some agency is going to step in and halt the ban, so that's a possibility. But this leads me to a conversation that I wanted to have anyway, so it's a perfect time to make a video talking about my personal thoughts about the TikTok situation, and more importantly, about the misinformation and the lack of clear communications that happens on the channel. Some tools and things to look out for that should help you guys when you're having discussions in places like Nicaragua, because there's a lot of, I think, bot traffic that people don't realize or know to look for. And I just want to point out, it's just a topic I've been wanting to touch on. And with TikTok's the event, one way or another, happening today on Sunday the 19th, it just seemed like a perfect time to have this conversation. So we're going to talk about that right after the bump. I'm recording today's video on the day that we have people waiting in line since early this morning, and it's now mid-afternoon, for tickets to the Leon baseball game tonight. We're hoping to get to go, and with any luck, I will actually get tickets and be able to film that for you guys, but probably not, because they've been waiting all day. Some fights broke out in the lines. The police had to break up the lines, close the window, and people have to return at 2 o'clock, and everyone's spot in line is now locked. So if you were in line in a good spot, you've got it, and if you are not, you're out of luck, which is how it probably should be, but it is not necessarily always how it is. I also want to mention this is our first time using the GoPro 13 with the media mod, and the possibly number one thing I've been looking for from GoPro, which is to have an audio monitor on the front of the screen, is now there, and I hadn't realized it until just this second. It is fantastic, and I absolutely love that. So kudos to GoPro for finally putting that. A whole bunch of things that I've wanted came on the 13, so I'm very happy with it overall. We're also on the macro lens today, which I have to manually focus, but it seems to be working. So always looking for good feedback. Before we jump into today's topic, as always, if you guys want to scroll down into the show notes, we got information in the show notes for anything you probably will need, any contact information, and most importantly, how to send in a video of yourself so you can be on the show asking a question. Of course, if you don't want to make a video, just go down into the conversation below and ask your questions, say hello, introduce yourself, leave your comments and all that stuff. That is fantastic. It is so much fun when you guys actually send in a video, though, because I can put you on the show and it helps the whole community connect together. All that info on how to do that is in the show notes. I would love if we saw more people doing that. Okay, so today is Sunday the 19th, and if everything goes to plan, TikTok is being shut down in the United States, I guess this morning. I'm not exactly sure when it's going to happen. Now, I am a Gen Xer, and TikTok makes no sense to me. The algorithm is completely garbage, and as far as I'm concerned, every time I go to TikTok, it seems like they've engineered it to drive me away, which I then follow their instructions and move on to other platforms. I have no love lost for TikTok as a platform. However, I am a big proponent of the freedom of the press and social media, and I know a lot of people, especially in the United States, have this like, I'm so sick of social media, I hate social media. That is a terrible thought process, because if you break it down, there's two pieces there. One is hating society, right? The first piece is social. Social media is where the modern world carries on a large amount of our personal and interactive social lives. It has nothing to do with some artifact of being social media. It just means being social. So to hate that is really just kind of the modern get off my lawn. This is where people complain because they just don't like other people, and that's okay. But why do you dislike other people talking to each other? It doesn't really make much sense. Just let them go talk. That way they're not on your lawn. The other part is media. When we dislike media, we don't like being able to get the news. We don't like having access to information. Who is angry that they have access to information? These are weird artifacts, and I've never heard of anyone outside the US having this trigger, and I wonder how much this is some nefarious media campaign in America to make people hate human interactions and receiving news and having access to people's personal views on things. What's amazing is that so many people everywhere, but Americans especially, are so, well, freedom of the press and the importance of information, and we don't trust the government, we don't trust the media. But then when we're presented with an alternative, people are very happy to jump on ban them, make them go away. And I don't think people realize how important it is to have media that is contained outside the U.S., that is not sponsored by the U.S. government, that is difficult for the U.S. government to heavily influence. Because if we say we don't trust the media, we don't trust the government, that's saying we desperately need things like TikTok. And when I see people having conversations about TikTok online, the things that people say are insane in many cases. One, it's many false claims or misleading claims about TikTok and platforms in general. People claim that, oh, well, the Chinese government has access to your information, and there's no such thing as a Chinese company that doesn't have access to your information. Therefore, no Chinese business should be allowed in the U.S. But they leave out that it doesn't really make any difference. All governments everywhere in the world have that potential access to any data in their country. So there's nowhere in the world that you could not have that as a risk. Remember, China isn't getting information from TikTok. The perceived threat is that China could pull information from TikTok, information that presumably is already public anyway. But the only government that you really have to fear with that kind of information is your own. So whatever country you live in, you would fear that government having too much information about you. I don't live in China, so China having that information is the least level of concern possible in the world. The country, for me, that is most risky is America, because that is my government, and them having deep information about every aspect of my life is something they can take action on. So the one government I would like to have some insulation from is my own. If you're Canadian, then it would be the Canadian government. If you were British, it would be the UK government, and so forth. It's just a basic thing. So unless you're Chinese, TikTok is not really of any privacy concern in that way, unless you're putting information into it that you shouldn't be, in which case stop putting that information in that you don't want anyone to have, right? But as far as we know, it is as secure as anything is. I don't know that it is or isn't, but I have nothing that has shown any risk from TikTok. Every person who has mentioned it, any government, any media that has come up with a reason why they argue TikTok should be not allowed, is either a nonsensical argument that is simply a smoke and mirrors for people who don't think critically, or is a flat out lie. I've also had when people have argued, well, the reason that you have to ban it is because the servers are not in America. They are in America, and that the government has to be able to serve a warrant on it. They can. And then they go down the path of the very argument that the government needs unlimited access to all your data to keep us safe. And I understand the value to keeping us safe, and I understand you should be able to serve warrants on your own ground, but we have all that, and those are completely made-up arguments once again. But the interesting thing is this panic over a random foreign government maybe having access to our information that they really can't do anything useful with, but then using the claim that we need a government to have complete access to our information as another reason for needing to do the ban. So literally counteracting their own arguments in many of the discussions I've seen. I've yet to see any logical, reasonable, non-hateful argument made for why TikTok would even be considered for a ban. Now, that doesn't mean people like it. I think it's a terrible platform. I'm not arguing that it's a good thing and that it specifically is something we should have, but it is a really important platform for political discourse. And it is a place where a lot of important views are shared, and it is obvious beyond the shadow of a doubt that people who are actively trying to get rid of TikTok are doing so for one simple reason. They don't like the information that is shared or potentially shared on it, and they are trying to silence or control the media that you are able to hear. They don't have enough control of TikTok, so they want to take it away. And it's funny that they argue that all these places in the world they don't have freedom of speech, they don't have freedom of the press like the United States does. But then the United States is constantly silencing or controlling the media, and when they can't, they shut it down and ban it, while all those countries that the U.S. likes to claim don't have freedom of the press, claim don't have freedom of speech, have no problem with TikTok, they have no problem with YouTube, they have no problem with Instagram, they have no problem. Someone does, but not the ones the U.S. are complaining about. And more importantly, we can still, in all those places, get access to U.S. news, we can get access to British news, we can get access to Qatari news. We have news from all over the world, but the United States doesn't. Certain types of news are being suppressed. That tells you everything you could possibly need to know about what is going on. And that you can travel outside the U.S. and instantly have freedom of the press again, That's a really powerful thing. What's even more amazing is that TikTok, which is housed in the United States for its servers, which is heavily beholden to U.S. laws, is being threatened in this way. And for those who are wondering, we're going to talk in just a little bit about how it impacts us who are outside the U.S. but still Americans, because that is interesting as well. But even for Americans, where are people fleeing? Well, there's a application called the Little Red Book, or known as Red Note if you're on the application store. And this is the #1, at least on Apple, probably on Android as well. It is the #1 social media application right now for downloading. And that is a full-on Chinese housed and managed application. It is not new. It is kind of like a mix of TikTok and Pinterest, if I was to try to describe it loosely. And that takes all of the data out of the U.S. All the arguments for the U.S. needing control, all of the arguments for the U.S. needing to be able to serve warrants, we're giving that up to get rid of TikTok. We're not gaining it. We are giving it up. We are losing the ability for the police to deal, for the FBI to look into potential crimes that are being done. We are losing control as Americans in order to silence the messages that are coming from TikTok. The people who are going to Red Note, which I am one, you can go find me on there, of course, and lots of other people who've been on TikTok. And just like TikTok, I have no idea what I'm doing, and it's not my main platform. Just stick with me here. But if you want to check it out, it is free. It's a little bit confusing to use. There's plenty of people making things about it, and a lot of people are really excited to experience the freedom of a Chinese application that is not being overseen by the U.S. Now, the U.S. may block it on the App Store as well, but like TikTok, they can't really block it entirely. But the U.S. is trying to go down the path after all this time of accusing China of having the Great Firewall, right? The Great Firewall of China. The United States is the one that is now blocking these applications, blocking the news from its own citizens, and getting American citizens to brag about it, to claim that they want it, or at least they're saying that American citizens are saying that, which we're going to get to in just a minute. But, so how is the U.S. really doing this? So one, they are blocking the traffic coming from TikTok, or will block, right? They're asking TikTok to block it themselves, and TikTok is going to voluntarily do this. So it's not that TikTok is trying to get it to us and the U.S. is trying to block it. They simply action a legal decision on TikTok, and TikTok is abiding by it voluntarily. So there's no like attempt to work around it. So TikTok's information is going to be available to the rest of the world, as with the rest of the free world will have access to TikTok, and the US will be blocked from it. You can just use a VPN, of course, to get past that. You can use a remote computer to get past that. There's lots of standard techniques that people use to get to all kinds of US resources, which they block from the world quite commonly, using those techniques. So that is something we're used to, and that should work just fine. No one's going to be going out of their way to stop that, because they don't need to stop all people from having access to TikTok. They just have to take it out of the hands of the casual users, and that controls the message. This is one of the miracles of having freedom of the press, is that you don't have to actually block people speaking. You don't have to actually block news being reported. You just have to change the statistical groups that are able to access it, and that does all you need to do. This is where math makes it easy to control democracies. There's no way for the truth to matter when the masses don't have easy access to it. This is it completely effective, and it's why places like the US have no fear of having freedom of speech, because dissent, like me complaining about this, will go nowhere. It doesn't matter how much I tell you what's going on. People have no action that they can take, and no way to get your voice amplified to a point where people will sit down and realize what's going on. It just doesn't work that way. It doesn't require conspiracy. It's just common sense. But people don't sit around and think about that. And even if they do, how do you counteract it? Other than having true freedom of the press, true freedom of speech, where all speech is equal. And we had some things where we tried to do that, like the Internet Equity Act, or the Free Internet Act, where they would protect that all internet was equally accessible. That got shot down. Why? Because it gives ISPs the ability to act as an arm of the government and control which types of media you have ready access to. If you are dedicated to getting something, you will get it. But the average person isn't dedicated to finding out any particular bit of information, and they don't know where to look. So no matter how much they could get access to it, it controls what your message really is on any level. It's a completely effective tool, while making people be able to argue falsely that we still have a freedom of speech and press. Yes, you're free to say it, but the freedom for your message to get to people that you've said it to, oh, we don't protect their right to listen. That's an essential part of what freedom of speech requires. And without it, you can't argue that there's any semblance of the First Amendment being honored in the United States. But with a VPN or a remote computer, you can easily get access to TikTok. So if you care, you're not being completely cut off. But what does matter is that the application that runs on your phone, the thing that 99% of people use to access TikTok, will no longer be available from the app stores, either Android or iPhone, or any device, right? Those are no longer going to be able to be installed. They will not automatically delete from your devices, to the best of my knowledge and from everything I've heard, but they will no longer update. So over time, they will stop functioning. They will probably do what they can to push out updates quickly so that it will work as long as possible, but without a VPN, it has nothing to connect to, so just having the app will get you nowhere. So there's this combination of things that make it ineffective. Now, what's really important is for those of us who have moved outside the United States, we will lose no access to TikTok whatsoever. We will not notice anything changing. We will simply have access as we always have, which is great. However, some of us get our data through the United States. So we will see if here in Nicaragua, how many places are filtered by the United States being a filtering entity in between. It may not affect us at all. It may be a complete ban. We will see. VPNs, again, will get around it. There will be ways around it, but because Nicaragua gets their data from the United States, we may be impacted by that. However, we will not lose the apps in our app store unless you are an expat from the United States, in which case your app store is tied to the United States, and you will be blocked. So even though you live outside the United States and the U.S. has no network jurisdiction over you, they're able to, with the long reach of practicality, impact nearly all expats pretty effectively. So even living outside the United States, your easy access to daily use of TikTok will be greatly diminished, if not completely removed. So if you need to get access to it, you'll find a way, but it won't be easy, and most everyone you know will stop using it because it just won't be practical. People use what is easy. That is never going to change. That's the power that the government knows. They don't have to take it away completely. They only have to make it a little bit harder, and you'll stop using it, or the public will stop using it, and then nothing matters because you have no audience to reach. So give RedNote a quick look and try signing in. Be ready just in case you need to use it. And there's every possibility that TikTok will remain. So that is what's going on with TikTok and how it's going to affect most people outside the U.S. Most places are not going to notice the ban in any way. It's only if you happen to have a U.S. registered device and or in a place where your network comes from the United States, or you're using a VPN back to the United States. It won't work over that as well, obviously. So hopefully that gets reversed. Hopefully the rational parts of the government, which are few and far between, step in and do something to protect the people. But it's not anticipated that that is going to happen. This is clearly a play for control of the American mind share, and that is an effective thing that happens over and over again. And I find it so frustrating to see the number of people claiming to be Americans actively arguing against First Amendment rights. Everything in America, whether it's your right to vote, depends on the freedom of speech. If you don't have the freedom of information, your vote is meaningless. You have no concept of democracy without freedom of speech. And things like the Second Amendment, right? If you want to take away people's guns, and I'm not arguing that you should or shouldn't, but there's a tool you could use. And in America, we talk about this a lot. All these things that people say, well, this has happened, we're not taking away guns. This will be really hard to take away guns. But there's one thing you can do that guarantees it's really easy to take away people's guns, and that is to take away their voice. Once Americans can't freely discuss, once they can't freely get information to the media, once the media sends whatever message in all cases that the government wants, and trust me, the TikTok thing isn't just about silencing TikTok. It is a threat to all the other platforms that if they don't play nice, the US will just block them or shut them down. It doesn't have to be TikTok that is being affected. Everybody is affected. You are affected today by this. It doesn't even have to have taken effect yet. It doesn't have to go through with the final shutdown for the effect to already exist. YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, RedNote, everybody. Everybody is aware of the threat and risk of not bowing down before the U.S. government and giving them access and control and filtering as they want. That message has been sent and received, period. There's no gray area. It has happened. Your freedom of speech, your freedom of media are gone. They do not exist. That is a farce. That is the first step. Now, I don't know that the government wants to take away your guns, but if I was a government and I wanted to take away guns, this is what I would do. This is how you get control. This is how you stop people having the right to speak up and get their message out. Hey, they're going to take away our guns. They're doing this thing. I'm not saying, again, I'm not arguing for or against guns. I'm arguing that the Second Amendment right and other amendment rights are protected by the First Amendment. Without the First Amendment, the other amendments do not exist. They may exist on paper, but you have no way to enforce them. You have no way to know about them. You have no way to action them. You have no way to speak up about them. The government controls the message. So if you want to protect Second Amendment, 14th Amendment, whatever amendment it is you want to protect, you have to speak up and do something to protect the First Amendment. And that's the purpose of the Second Amendment. You may not agree with it. You may think it's a bad idea. You may think its time has come and gone. Those are rational arguments that you may have. But the one argument that you can't argue against is that the fundamental purpose of the Second Amendment was for the ability, for the right, for the potential to need to protect the First Amendment. And that's what's not happening. People are ignoring their Second Amendment duties, responsibilities, options, and letting the First Amendment simply be washed away. And it's been eroded for a long time. I'm not saying that it hasn't. I'm not saying that this is one action that's making it happen. What I'm telling you is that this is a major step in one of the last nails in a coffin of an amendment that has long been overlooked and not taken seriously. But if you're worried, we spend so much time being distracted to argue about the Second Amendment. You don't need to argue about it. The decision about all those other amendments is going to be made by someone that isn't you if your First Amendment isn't protected. I'm going to let it go at that point. These are really important topics. But the reason that this came up, other than being the 19th, is I get so many comments in our discussion groups, and it's really obvious to me because I see them in a different way than you guys do. When you guys see comments on the threads, mostly they are very independent and isolated. And that's going to give you a very different view of what's being said. It's hard to tell when someone is real or not, when someone is being paid, or whether someone's even a real person. And when you're looking at it like I do from a large group, from a large perspective, and I see these comments all the time, and I see them across different platforms, because I see them on TikTok, or I used to. I see them on Instagram. I see them on YouTube. I see them on Reddit. I see them on you name it, right? The same exact comments, the same wording, the same illogical conclusions, the same phraseology, approach to trying to sneak in misinformation, to act as though they're questioning something when really stating something, when they're flat out saying something that is wrong, when they use some statement to try to protect something unrelated. Now, not everyone notices these things, but I see the pattern, and it is really, really clear, and we get a lot of this. We also see some spam things that are similar. So I'm going to talk about that real quickly. Whenever we talk about money, we talk about currency, Bitcoin, anything like that, we're going to get a couple bots that come in, and they will say, and it's very predictable, they'll say something like, okay, that's interesting, and they'll never actually speak to exactly what you said because it's automated and they don't actually know what you said. And they'll know from the title or the description or the keywords that it's about money or finances or something of that nature. And they'll ask something about, but how do I protect my retirement, for example? And then after 15 or 20 minutes, there will be an automated response that says something like, but you don't know it's automated if you don't know to look for this. And it'll say something like, oh, I had great luck by going through a financial planner. And then the first bot will say, ooh, what financial planner are you recommending? And then it'll recommend some random name that makes no sense, and no normal human would talk that way. By this point, anyone who's actually thinking critically about it, but no one does, because why would you be paying attention, would read it and say, that is not a normal human response to these things, and no one raves about their financial planner this way, and financial planners are pretty much a weird concept to be talking about at all. You're certainly not recommending them. You're certainly not asking for one. And it doesn't make any sense on a moving to Nicaragua thread. And you're like, wait, this is really weird. And then suddenly hundreds of posts pop up of people claiming to be customers and saying they swear by that person and they're rich because of that person and they made their millions, and it's all fake. And this is, of course, how Bitcoin is sold in most places, and gold is sold. All those kinds of things get sold through these completely scam marketing techniques where they act like there's people making lots of money off of it, when in reality, those people aren't even real and there's no transactions. It's all fake. So we get used to this. And I know the pattern, and we can make it disappear really quickly. So you guys often don't see these, even though they come up all the time, because we report them immediately. It's a repeating pattern. Like the thing that I'm saying, they'll change the name that they're recommending, but it is the exact same pattern, things that they say, things that they ask, every time, same timing. Like it's a very clear set of bots that just go around looking for these words and do this thing in a pattern. So you get used to it in that scam. But when you're talking about Nicaragua, and so few people do, that there aren't very many people out there in the world, maybe 5 to 10 of us globally, who have the same kind of conversations about Nicaragua that the way that some people have about Bitcoin. That's a bit of a stretch, but you kind of know what I mean. When we do this on any platform, we get something very similar. It doesn't quite have the back and forth nature of those bots, but we do get constant comments where people will ask a question and then make a statement, and then when you say something that's true, they are locked and loaded with misinformation that they try to sneak in, and they have straw man attacks and all kinds of misinformation approaches and leading questions that they do to try to create an argument where they're going to sneak in information and try to present a concern that doesn't really exist. They try to act like something's happened to them. Sometimes they tell a fake story. Sometimes and in every case, it's never an account that can prove who it is. It's always anonymous. It's always someone who's never participated before. There's just a bunch of patterns that go together, and you start to recognize that it's happening everywhere. But really importantly, a few things consistently come up in it. One is that the approach is really consistent. It's clear that it's either an automated system or people, unlikely because it would be costly, who are trained and running a playbook to do this. So they're being told by someone exactly what to say, and they are repeating it. Now, in many cases, I believe it is bots. In many cases, I know it's bots. There's no way there's a human doing some of these things. But some of them do seem to be legitimately real people. But in those cases, they're still running the same playbook as the bots. And this is really interesting. Why would they be doing it? And the best of my knowledge, there's two groups. One is a group of people who are simply paid to do this, and they're basically professional bots. They're just lowly paid social media posters who some agency, probably through a third party, pays to go out and post garbage stuff to try to create public opinion or create fear or doubt really publicly. That they need to do this stuff, by the way, tells you a lot about which governments are willing to pay to keep you from finding things out. So look for places where this is happening, because it tells you that your government that's paying to try to convince you to be scared of something is scared of you finding out what's there. They're willing to lie and go through great effort to keep you from feeling comfortable learning more about the world, which tells you you need to go find out what they're trying to hide from you, whether it's for your own safety, whether it's for your general good, whether it's to find out what they've done to you. Who knows why they're doing it, but that it's happening is really clear and really common. And so if you work in this space, you see it all the time. The second piece is I think there's a number of people. So for example, tons of people seem from time to time to be legitimately people who came from Nicaragua and are posting misinformation from the United States, or claim to be in the United States, or seem to be in the United States, and are posting misinformation that it's very clear makes no sense if they had any knowledge of Nicaragua. So why would they be doing this if it seems that they are long-term Nicaraguans that should know better? Well, the only thing I can come up with is either they're being paid and they simply want to make some money, but that seems less likely to sell out your own country and culture and people. You would need a lot of money to justify doing that, whereas if you're just paying someone who doesn't know what Nicaragua is to post, they don't really care in most cases. It's easy to find people in one case, hard in the other. But what does seem to make sense is that there are a lot of people who, and it doesn't require an active threat, it only requires the fear that it could happen, that there are a number of people who believe they need to be in the United States, or have family that are in the United States and they want to stay, or fear that they're going to be deported somewhere that isn't somewhere good, like Mexico instead of Nicaragua, when they're not citizens and they could be jailed in Mexico for being illegal immigrants or whatever. They may fear that they're going to go to jail. They may fear that they came into the U.S. illegally and something really bad is going to happen to them. That's real. If you've ever heard of border control, that's not fake. Those people really arrest people. They really separate families. They really take kids away. They really send you to different countries. Lots of bad things happen. And a lot of people from any given country move to any other country because they're criminals in their home country and they have warrants out for them, or legal proceedings waiting for them, or debts that are waiting for them, and they're afraid to go home. And it doesn't have to be real threats. It only has to be perceived to a point where someone has an emotional reaction. And those people, whether it's under active duress or perceived threat, or just a general fear or a belief that by posting misinformation in the favor of the country that they're trying to move to, that they're hoping that that government will look favorably on them when going through immigration proceedings, for example, or legal proceedings, if they're maybe looking at jail time. So there's a lot of people I think are fearful of the U.S. government and are posting either because they're told to or because they think somehow it will benefit them, but that they're often running the same playbook means they're in contact with someone. They're getting information about what to say. The amount that we see this, and I'm not saying we get this post every day, but probably every 72 hours, we're getting at least one thread where someone is running this playbook over and over and over again. in one of these different ways. And there's a little bit of variation, but the pattern is clear. And part of that pattern isn't just the mechanisms that are used, but there are speech patterns that are designed to only trigger Americans who are reading the material. If you were a Canadian, or you were British or German or Australian or whatever, and you were reading the material, it would often seem nonsensical because the things that are being said are not real concerns. They will post something as if it's scary when they actually said something good, but they are specifically, being an American, I'm aware of this, specifically words and phrases and things that are used to evoke fear, that are specifically concerns in the United States that don't make sense to the rest of the world. Every culture has this. I'm not picking on the US. In this case, as an American, I recognize when these patterns happen. And it's really clear that they're using trigger words for Americans that, in a broader sense, someone who is thinking critically, someone who is honestly considering Nicaragua, someone who is really looking into the world would never have these concerns. Only someone who is afraid of the world or actioning a playbook, thinking that Americans who are casually reading this would understand the context that other Americans would say. And I'll just use a common example is they will misstate really obvious political information. And I don't mean about a specific country. I mean in the general sense, completely misuse political terms in ways that anyone with the slightest knowledge of how politics work around the world, how governments work, would know makes no sense. But in America, they're specifically teaching these words as trigger words for something unrelated to what they actually mean. So it's really easy to see when someone is speaking, not to me, and not asking a real concern, because it would not be an honest concern to them, and they know that it's misinformation to me that I clearly know better about. So they're writing to me for the purpose of some third party to read it, not think critically, not ask for more insight, and react emotionally to it. It's a powerful tool, and it's important to understand when you're looking at comments everywhere. My YouTube community for sure, but you're on Reddit. Reddit is nothing but this. There's like no honest discourse in most things on Reddit, and if there is, they delete it. There's moderators that control those communities. And I'm not saying there's no moderation here either. We have no expectation of freedom of speech in private threads in our group. We say we have rules. You have to be friendly, can't be spreading misinformation, can't be lying, can't be, threatening, things like that. And we've had that stuff. They instant ban. And the things that are the worst are I never even see them. Right. But one of the things we definitely always ban is someone, and this is another pattern that's really popular, if someone says something that they're sure is really inflammatory and they think is going to not be easily refuted, they will then follow up with claiming that the thing that they said was deleted. And we've had one where we actually pulled them up. We're like, look, they're on the screen. Can you read them? We can read them. Everyone's posting. Yeah, I see it. And they're like, no, I can't see it. You just wrote that. Like just making up anything they can to claim those things were deleted because they thought for sure it was going to be. Or it's a powerful tool to make third parties read it and go, they must have deleted something. Why would they say that? Right? So you can claim people are deleting anything you want and make it real powerful. So that's an automatic nuke. Anyone who says that, anyone who lies to me directly, gone. And that's just part of our policy. So that's them self-deleting, and you'll never see them. So it's a powerful tool in that way. And that's a good thing about the moderation, but it's important to know that that's how it works. But people will spread so much misinformation about the moderation and say, oh, you deleted these things. No, they didn't. It's never there. I delete so little. I can't even tell you the last time I deleted something, right? Probably a few weeks ago, but it's really rare. And people will claim every few hours that it's happening, and it's not at all. But those kinds of things, there's all these playbooks that are really effective. But when you're looking at any of these discussion groups, remember that the people are rarely asking real questions. When they are, it's normally really obvious. Hey, how do you exchange money in Nicaragua? What's the exchange rate? How safe is this neighborhood? What is the cost of living here? Should I take a taxi to this? When you're asking real questions, they come across in a very normal way. When you're asking leading questions and trying to trigger an argument about something where you're trying to spread misinformation, it feels weird, it sounds weird, and it's not of interest to normal readers. But they're writing it not because they think I'm going to fall for it. Obviously, they're not that dumb. They know I know the truth. So when they're writing to me, they're trying to either trigger me to say something, to like lose my temper and say something incorrect or to say something inflammatory, and then they can attack me or quote me or something. That's one potential thing. The other is that they're simply trying to get their thoughts out in a way that's really effective for other readers, that someone can come along and say, "Ooh, this person is really concerned about this. If they're concerned, should I be concerned?" And no matter how much we say this is a false concern, like, but they're concerned. No, they're not. They're a bot. They're a bot that's so scared of you finding out the truth that they're putting the effort to try to trick you, not me, you guys. So it's something to look for. And just seemed like it went with the TikTok discussion today, and it was on my list of topics I wanted to talk about because it did come up a bit relatively recently, and it is interesting and important because this happens in every community everywhere, and we just see it here about Nicaragua. This is a standard set of tools that companies use, independent people use, governments use. It's just a misinformation toolbox that in the modern world we have to learn how to use. In every age and every era and every generation, we have to learn how to not be tricked by people who are taking advantage of changes to media, changes to the way that society interacts, and this is one of the ways that we have to learn in this generation. Thanks for joining me. Like and subscribe. If you'd like to help support the channel, you can buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/ScottAlanMiller. If you have a VPN, go follow me on TikTok, same name as here. The content there is not unique, so there's no real reason to do so, but it's a nice spiritual victory to have more people. Look me up on RedNote, of course. If you'd like to help support the channel in a monthly way where you make a small commitment, we have a join button to our community just down below where it's just $5 a month, and you don't really get anything for it except that warm and fuzzy feeling of supporting the channel. All my contact information is in the show notes, as is all the information on how to say hello, send in a video of yourself, and all stuff like that. You can also support the channel simply by watching another video and sending links to friends and family, letting them know about the show and getting people addicted to watching too. So thankful for all of you who joined me here, and looking forward to more exciting content, and tomorrow is going to be an exciting day on the show, I think, as well. If all goes to plan, we'll be doing a show about the obvious places that Americans may consider moving to. We do a lot of non-obvious ones. We're going to work on some obvious ones as a change. Hopefully I manage to get that episode out in all my abundance of time. Thanks for joining me. I'll see you all tomorrow.